no single decision I've made in my years of drawing has helped my drawing to improve as much, as dramatically, and in some ways as naturally as the decision to start drawing freehand directly in ink without any pencil underdrawing, with nothing that I was able to erase, where every mark I put on the paper would be there at the end. And I did this because I was becoming more and more perfectionistic and I was erasing more than I was drawing, it seemed like. And this was the best decision I ever made for my drawing. The first point I want to make is not really one of the six. It's an overarching description really that covers all of them. But that's that we have to be more strategic in our planning when we draw freehand and ink. I'm always making the point, we need to think before we put marks on the paper. But when we can't remove any of them, it's even more important that we have a plan of attack, a general way we approach drawing, but then specifically for this particular drawing that takes into account the individualities of it. And can I say, you'll see me using these 6 points in this drawing. And you're watching the demonstration drawing at a bit less than 4 times drawing speed. So if you want to slow this video down to half speed, then it will be, I think, a lot easier to see what I'm doing as far as the demo goes, putting these 6 points into practice. But the first point is it's important that we match the pen we use, and by that I mean the width of pen, the width of the line we're going to be using, with the detail that we're expecting to have to draw, as well as the size, the scale of our drawing. Clearly the same drawing, drawn smaller, is going to be harder to put that detail in than if it were a larger one and still have some separation between our lines and our marks. So if I choose the wrong pen, if I just pick up any pen, I may end up with something that looks a bit too sparse if the line's too thin, or something that ends up looking very inky and blotchy because there's not been as much separation between the ink lines and marks as was needed to understand properly what we're looking at. The second point then, once we've chosen our pen or pens, because we may choose to use different pens, different widths of pen for different parts of our scene or for different purposes in our scene, such as the hatching for value. The next important point is to now choose the best starting point. And in my thinking, that's always the part that I can draw most accurately, most easily. And in architectural terms, that's usually something that we're seeing either fairly straight on or is a fairly simple shape, such as a rectangle or close to a rectangle. And in this corner building, this corner terrace, the front door on the lower floor was the most, I thought, easiest place to start with. But if you've seen a lot of my other drawing demos, you'll know that very often I start more with the upper floor because of the clutter that we often have at street level. In my mind, it makes it harder to establish an accurate scale with all of these different objects overlapping. And so I tend to start with the first floor, the floor above ground level. But in this case, there really wasn't much in front of the lower or the ground level front door, and so I thought I'd work there and then go up. And that, I think, was a good call. And then I move outwards in all directions. By starting, if possible, towards the center of our composition, it means as we move around in all directions, there's more chance that we're not going to get as much creep, as much width creep as we move in each direction. That's the danger in drawing this way. But the problem with trying to rough out larger shapes is that we have to get the line correct for the entire shape, or else we won't be able to get the details in and keep them in proportion and in scale. And I find overall this is a more productive way of doing it in terms of the results I can get. Now, third tip is to use our pen to make lots of what I think of as positioning marks and lines, which may just be a dot where I think a line's going to go, or it may be a couple of dots, especially if it's a longer area, to let me visualize if I put the object, whatever I'm looking at, a corner or where the ground or whatever there, is that going to look right? It lets me imagine far more easily and accurately, if I draw the line there, will it look right or will I have regrets? And if you watch what I do in my demos, you'll see I often put dots. In fact, when I did that first door, the lower, the ground level door in the center, I put dots as I went across to help me position the verticals. And once the dot's there, it's important to actually take the moment to visualize now the line going through that and just make sure that it still looks okay. And if I have an equal space on each side of a door or window, I'll place a dot on each side, and then I'll visualize, do they look equal before I do either line? So these are the things we learn, or we basically learn what sort of positioning marks work for us as we draw and as we use them. And for some of us, some types of positioning marks might be more important than others. It just depends what things we particularly need a little bit of slowdown and just trying to kind of establish. There's a positioning mark. I'm doing a few positioning marks here because I'm trying to plot where to put this window. And please hit the like button if you're finding this demo interesting and these tips helpful. Now, the fourth point is to do with how I'm holding my pencil. Look how far back, well, it's a pen actually, isn't it? Look how far back my fingers are. Now, this has a couple of advantages. One is I can see everything around the nib really easily. I'm not hiding my drawing, which lets me check the positioning more comprehensively without any effort. As the ink's going on the paper, I can see everything around it and get a better view of what's happening. But also, it means I'm in no danger of blotting the ink by rubbing my hand over it before it's dry. And it lets me adopt a better way. It then becomes easier to hold the actual pen in a better way, and that is by basically locking the pen in my fingers like a vice, and then to move my whole arm at the very least from the elbow, if not from the shoulder. My hand, I should never be resting on my hand. If you have a look, you can see I'm never resting on my hand, which encourages then movement from the wrists and the fingers. Now, if I'm doing a very small detailed thing, I might move down towards the fingers, because then I do want to control the extra fine movements of the end of the pen with my fingers. But unless something such as that is happening, I keep them right back, lock my fingers, hold the pen rigidly in place, and move from my arm, gliding the bottom of my hand lightly over the paper. The fifth point is be very careful, and this goes back to that strategizing at the start. Be very careful about the things that are closest to us. Now, if we like drawing streetscapes, as I do, and I suspect many of you watching this will, then the challenge with streetscapes is that there's often a lot of layered cluttering between the building and us at ground level. And so, I don't know if you remember, but when I first began to do the drawing, this tall, strappy, flax-like plant that I'm doing at the moment, well, I've just done it now, I established where the highest of those sword-like leaves were going to poke up to, so that I could make sure I didn't bring any lines or marks for the building down into the white space that I needed to preserve for that. And so whatever it is we're looking at, I did something similar with that garbage bin, and I did something similar with that telegraph pole. Whatever it is we're looking at, if it's layered in front of something else, I need to make sure I preserve that space. In pencil, it's not so important because I can erase any overlapping of the lines where the background thing comes through the space where I want the foreground item to be. But that's not something that I can accommodate this way. And my sixth tip is to do with the values. Now, by values, we mean lights and darks. And if we draw with pencil, there's a huge variation with virtually any pencil that we can get in the amount of darkness that we can create. Now, we obviously can choose anything from a 6H pencil to a 6B pencil, and that's going to give us a wide range of values of potential darknesses. But even using the one pencil, we can get a range of values by the pressure we apply when we use it. And of course, we can also rotate the pencil to get a sharper edge or a blunter edge, and also vary the mark that we're making. There's less variety as easily produced with a fine liner ink pen, but we still can get a great variety of marks. And one of the advantages I didn't mention before in holding the pen this way is that we can get a very shallow angle with the paper, and by combining that with a fast line, more a flick even than a draw, we can get a very faint line compared to if we went more slowly and held the pen more upright. And by experimenting with the possible marks we can create with whatever brand of pen we like to use and the type of nib it has, we can discover the range of marks that we can create to get the variety that we want. And this can be very helpful with hatching. What I'm doing in this demo is I'm using a finer pen to do most of the hatching. Now, I drew this with a 0.2 uni pen fine liner, but I'm doing most of the hatching with a 0.05 uni pen. I always use the same brand if I use a range of pens for various reasons. And so that let me get more lines closer together by using the 0.05 instead of the 0.2, more lines closer together and several layers over the top to create a fairly dark and yet at the same time almost lighter grey value for the hatching, compared to the windows on the right hand side where I used the 0.2 because they were quite dark and I wanted those to be the darkest values in my drawing because they are the darkest values in the reference. I had far more variability in the darkness I could create by using the lighter lines created by the 0.05. And again, this I worked out in my mind, in my strategizing before I started. And can I say, firstly, please hit that like button if you haven't hit it already, and why not subscribe to my channel if that's not something you've done before. But the point I was really going to say was that these points all work exactly the same for location sketching directly in pen. And if you look at that top balcony, there is an error I made on the, if you like, the return section that goes towards the wall on the right hand side. And I just had a moment's lack of attention and I drew it in the wrong spot. I went past the corner of the wall. And I point it out now so that you can see how even when we make mistakes, when we put lines in the wrong place, so often they're not obvious at the end. We can in some way mitigate them, we can hide them, we can cover them up, we can draw something around it, we can put shadow on top of it or whatever. Or it simply won't be as obvious when the rest of the drawing is done because the rest of the drawing will have more detail. And you can see I'm using my 0.05 now to do some very light hatching for the colour of the road and footpath versus the gutters. And that's just to add a little bit of visual distinction to help us see what's happening and to help the foreground not to be too blank, which can be a problem or can be an issue when we have a roadway in front of our subject. So now I'm just doing a little bit more hatching and we're just about done. You'll find this reference photo on my channel community page, and it's there because you're welcome to use it to try and draw this yourself. And why not, if you normally draw in pencil, give a go drawing directly in ink and putting these 6 tips into practice, and just accepting the fact that mistakes are a part of learning to draw, and they're a part of any individual drawing, no matter how experienced we are. We don't need to be so fearful of them. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I really hope you have a go trying to draw this freehand directly in ink and use these 6 points. But hey, look, in the end, whatever you draw it with, and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I certainly did with this. I'll see you next time. Bye.